Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the commissioners. I'd like to just quickly introduce myself. I'm Kelly Buckland. I'm the Executive Director of the National Council on Independent Living, and it's my honor to appear before you today on behalf of our membership, which is composed of Centers for Independent Living, statewide independent living councils, and individuals with disabilities to discuss the importance of improving poll worker training with regard to disability and accessibility, increasing recruitment of poll workers with disabilities, and improving the lines at polling places. Just a quick point of personal privilege, if I may. I'd like to recognize Mr. Jim Dixon, who is co-chair of the Nickel Voting Rights Committee as well, and is in the room. According to a study conducted by Doug Schur and Lisa Cruz of Rutgers University, Mira Adya of Syracuse University, 15.6 million voters with disabilities voted in the election of November 2012, a number which is comparable to the number of African Americans, 17.8 million, and Hispanics, 11.2 million, who voted. Unfortunately, among voters with disabilities surveyed in this study, 30.1% reported experiencing one or more difficulties in voting. Only 8.4% of voters without disabilities faced difficulties. Furthermore, among persons with disabilities who have not voted within the last 10 years, 40.1% of respondents said that they would anticipate some difficulty voting if they wanted to vote at the polling place. And that's compared to only 1.2% of people without disabilities who have not voted in the last 10 years. However, there is almost no difference between voters with and without disabilities when it comes to being treated with respect by election officials at the polling place. 86.8% of voters without disabilities and 84.7% of voters with disabilities surveyed reported that they were treated very respectfully by poll workers. And that's been my personal experience too. I've been always treated with the utmost respect and professionalism by the poll workers. One way to potentially improve of disability and accessibility at the polls would be to increase the recruitment of poll workers with disabilities. Deanne Hart, a member of the Nickel Voting Rights Subcommittee, is legally blind and has been a poll worker in Delaware County, Indiana, and she offered this insight. The significance of people with disabilities being poll workers demonstrates the importance of our inclusion, acceptance within the community, and the power we all have to stand up for our civil rights. As a person with a disability, a person with a significant visual impairment, legally blind, at first I was hesitant to volunteer to be a poll worker. To date, I have previously served in every poll worker position. Sheriff, clerk, judge, and inspector. The latter, inspector, is where I've really found my niche. I work with 6 other individuals on election day, 2 sheriffs, 2 clerks, and 2 judges. We work as a team. As in any job, you have essential functions and transferable functions, and you delegate responsibilities when appropriate. The inspector and 2 opposing party judges make up the precinct election board, and I turn to them for help as needed. Also, would just like to mention that my wife also has a disability, and she's also an election worker and a poll worker, and she showed me that the election officer manual that they provide in Fairfax County, and I noticed on the web so that there's a gentleman there from Fairfax County, and he mentioned recruiting poll workers with disabilities. So I think that's really interesting, and there's a section on how to treat people with disabilities at the polls in the training guide that Fairfax County uses. So, and I read through it, and it's really good information. And and my wife really enjoys her time at the polls when she works the elections. I mean, it's long hours, but she really enjoys being there and doing it. So I think that's something that we should try to expand on. There's, in my written testimony, which I will submit for the record, or I can provide it electronically if you so desire, there's a number of resources that we point out that you can use to recruit people with disabilities at the polls. Most of them are organizations that work with people with disabilities, including nickel, of course. And then just quickly, I want to mention a study that was done on poll worker training programs, and this was done at Paraquad, which is a Center for Independent Living in St. Louis. And there's a number of, I see my time's running short, so there's a number of facts and figures about the study that they did on poll workers with disabilities at Paraquad, and suffice it to say, researchers found a lot of significant issues around disability at the polls, and so we also provided, if you will, a map that kind of shows what we think is one of the best ways to lay the process out. And then finally, over half the poll workers in this study, over half the poll workers exposed to Election Day Job Aid reporting used it, and among those who utilized the aid, 90% reported that they felt that the aid was very helpful. This is talking about having an aid at the polls because of the job, and it was successful as compared to mixed results of the training. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired, and I want to thank you. And like I said, I'll leave the copy of my testimony for the record, and we can provide it in electronic format too if you
Thank you. What we're going to do is have everyone give brief remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions. But we will submit all your information for the official record. Thank you.
Masterson, Commissioner McCormick, I thank you greatly for the opportunity to come share with the Commission the very interesting work and relevant work that LA County Registrar Recorder is doing in the field of data science and advanced data analytic technique as it pertains to the managing of our poll worker programs. I'd like to share a little bit of some data with you to highlight the challenges that a large county faces as it pertains to trying to find enough poll workers to man many, many precincts to serve many, many voters. To give you an idea, for the November 2014 general election, we were able to recruit a little over 24,000 poll workers to man a little over 4,500 precincts. And we made it. We hit our numbers. We didn't see long lines. While there were some hiccups out in the field, voters received the services that we intended to provide to them. However, to highlight the challenge of finding that many people, we had to call and speak with roughly 36,500 individuals. So the question then is, why the gap? Why so many more people than we actually needed? Well, as it turns out, we saw about 4,400 folks that we did call and get commitments from end up calling us back and telling us, sorry, can't do it, for a myriad of reasons. Could have been childcare, could have been illness, or simply lack of desire. That happens, right? Also saw about 2,500 folks, when we did call them, share with us, either politely or impolitely, a no thank you. They were just not interested. But the worst for us, because it has such a tremendous effect on Election Day, are our no-shows, because we can't know until that day when they don't show up. We saw 5,500 individuals that we thought we had commitments from not show up. So what does that mean? Well, that could potentially mean poll locations not opening on time, slowed because we didn't have enough folks there, materials not where they need to be. So it causes tremendous delay, and it causes tremendous amount of resources being spent by our organization trying to send folks out last minute, identify new folks to get them out there, so on and so forth. So it's a true challenge for us. So if you can imagine, if we had a crystal ball and we knew who to call and get commitments from versus not who to call and get commitments from, that would be great for us. Well, we've attempted to develop a crystal ball so we would have more success in being able to, on Election Day, have the right people out there that we knew were committed and were working for the department. So as part of the data analytics project, we've been able to develop a prediction algorithm that is able to classify for our recruiters who the right people are to call when recruiting from a pool of about 109,000 individuals that have worked for us at some point in the past, right? And while I will not get into, given my brief remarks, how that statistical modeling works, I'm happy to answer those questions at a later point. I will say this. In simulated elections, we're seeing on average for a general election about a 67% success rate without the model. With the model, we're seeing an 88% success rate. What does that actually mean? Well, if we were to redo 2014 over using this model, where we saw 12,500 negative outcomes of no-shows and cancellations, using this model, we would reduce that number down to about 3,000. So while it's not a perfect algorithm, it doesn't pretend to be a perfect algorithm, we're seeing a 75% reduction in the number of negative outcomes, which basically means we're still able to find the right people while not have to worry about having the wrong people that we thought we could count on that we can't really count on. So we are now at the point of being able to operationalize this algorithm. Our recruiters are using the new lists that's being generated for them from this prediction algorithm. And the lists are basically the name of the poll worker and a score associated based on what the algorithm sees in their data pattern, and a threshold saying, you know what, call the people that are above this threshold and don't call the people below this certain threshold. And if you run out of folks, we can move the threshold down, still maintaining high levels of accuracy. So we'll see from the primary election how that actually goes. Likewise, as a part of recruitment, as you can imagine, there are hard to recruit poll locations. They consistently come up from election to election, and we don't get the staffing that we need for a myriad of reasons. So as part of the data analytics program, we've been able to identify ahead of time. So instead of waiting till the last minute and realizing, oh my goodness, we still have boards of 2 or we didn't make our numbers, we're able to anticipate ahead of time which areas should we concentrate more resources up front so that we can find the right staffing so that at the end we're not in a pinch. And lastly, I'd like to share with you, and this is currently in development, I see that my time's running out. Lastly, in development right now is a prediction algorithm that will help us identify for any future election what turnout will be at the precinct level. As you can imagine, what the business applications are for that. Particularly if we can identify hot precincts that we expect that we need to have additional staff for poll workers, we'll know ahead of time as we go into that election how many more poll workers we need to have at those special hot precincts, how many additional supplies, how many additional ballots, so on and so forth, based on predicted turnout. So that's the type of work that we are doing in LA County. The idea is to move our management of these programs into a more data-driven approach so that we can have more impactful management decisions that will yield better outcomes for us. I thank you for the time, and I'm happy to answer further questions at a later time.
Good morning. I'd like to talk a little bit about how implementing new technology can actually impact recruiting, training, and retaining election workers. In November of 2015, Hamilton County, Ohio, implemented electronic poll books for the first time in a countywide election. And we anticipated there would be some minor technical glitches and a learning curve for the poll workers as the technology was new. However, those technical glitches and the learning curve for the poll workers rose to a level that was unacceptable. And it really left a little bit of a black eye on Hamilton County Board of Elections and our poll workers. So with the presidential primary election just 4 months away after the November election, there was little time to correct the problem. We focused on 2 aspects. One was fixing the technical glitches, and the other was improving our poll worker recruiting and training. Fixing the technical glitches actually ended up being the easier of the 2. Thorough testing revealed that there was a simple hardware defect in the router. We replaced all the routers and did some minor tweaking on our checklists, and those issues were resolved. However, the learning curve for the poll workers was a little more challenging. We decided to attack that challenge by focusing our efforts on the 2 areas I mentioned before, training and recruiting. tweaked our training curriculum to provide more hands-on breakout sessions and decided to train all poll workers on all processes. We realized in the November election that sometimes the poll worker that we may have trained specifically for certain duties may not be as comfortable with the technology as another poll worker that we had trained on different duties. We developed and instituted a pass-fail test at the end of the poll worker class. If the poll worker failed the test, he or she could choose to retake the class and the test a second time. We also implemented something called Practice Makes Perfect, and we allowed the individual poll workers to come down to the Board of Elections after their formal training and just practice at an e-poll book. We set up numerous devices with different voting scenarios, and the poll workers could just practice over and over again until they felt completely comfortable with the process. Recruiting and retaining poll workers is never an easy task, and new technology, adding new technology to a group of workers whose average age is close to 70 can be a Herculean task. To accomplish our recruitment and retention goals, we launched two programs, Partners in Democracy and Youth at the Booth. Our Partners in Democracy program encourages local government agencies and businesses to give their employees the day off for democracy. By giving their employees the day off with pay, plus the additional poll worker pay, employees had a financial incentive to work the polls. In order to develop these recruitment programs, we knew we needed to develop personal relationships. Simply sending an email or mailing an informational packet is not enough to convince government, and especially business leaders, to give a day off with pay to their employees. So our board created two new full-time recruiter positions to build and maintain those relationships. The Ohio Secretary of State, John Husted, is also assisting local boards of elections in Ohio by assigning a marketing and outreach manager to each board of elections to assist in reaching out to the local business communities. Finally, after each election, our Partners in Democracy are presented with a plaque and are recognized publicly for their partnership. We also quickly realized we needed to recruit younger poll workers who are familiar with today's technology. To the younger generation, comfortability with wireless devices is almost second nature. So we turned to our local high schools. And fortunately, in Ohio, 17-year-old high school seniors are allowed to work the polls on Election Day. So that gives us an even greater pool of poll workers in which to recruit from. But this concept was not new to Ohio. Our Youth at the Booth program actually started in the late 1990s, but it just didn't receive a whole lot of attention. However, the introduction of iPads to the election process has sparked a new interest, and teenagers can see how incredibly valuable their technology skill sets are in the election process. And honestly, the local media loved the story. Every news network in Cincinnati ran at least one story about the Youth at the Booth program leading up to the presidential primary in March. We were able to place a high school senior in 50% of our polling locations. And the teenagers received universal praise from their adult counterparts. Their adult counterparts loved having them work with them. And our goal is to place one high school senior in every polling location in the upcoming presidential election. And we hope to unveil a Youth at the Booth challenge at the start of the school year in order to reach that goal. These recruitment efforts are in no way an effort to phase out our older generation poll workers. To the contrary, they are an effort to build the perfect team. We compare the younger generation's familiarity with today's technology, the business community's work experience and customer service experience, with our older generation's knowledge of election procedures to create an ideal group of poll workers. Building a team of poll workers who work well together increases the board's ability to retain those workers for years to come. That concludes my testimony for today. I'd be happy to answer questions later.
Good morning. It is definitely a delight to come before this body and share information as it pertains to how the City of Detroit Department of Elections recruits and retains poll workers for Election Day. First and foremost, I just want to share with you the genesis in terms of our focus pertaining to this upcoming election. As you know, the November 8th presidential election presents challenges in and of itself just based on the total voter turnout in any community. It's the highest nationally. But for the state of Michigan, one of our biggest challenges is that the legislature and the governor just adopted a bill that eliminates straight party voting. With that being said, one of the biggest challenges as it pertains to that is to manage lines on election day to ensure that we don't have an increase in a bottleneck because voters have to vote for the individual candidates in all offices, particularly in the city of Detroit. So our concept was to make sure that we implement a new process to guarantee efficiency at the precinct on Election Day. So in Detroit, we have 490 precincts, and of the 490 precincts, 73 of them have, in 2012, 600 to 1,200 voters who engaged in the process for that particular election. And as such, what we decided to do was to split those precincts out to make sure that when voters attend those polling places, they would have an option to go to Table 1 or Table 2, ultimately cutting the processing time down in half. In addition to that, we're going to increase our voting booths to make sure that we don't have a bottleneck there. With that being said, we had to introduce an additional 500 poll workers at the polls on Election Day, so that was a challenge in and of itself. Then with the presidential primary election, we noticed that, as with most communities, you experience a deficit on Election Day. You train and you prepare for Election Day, and for us, it takes approximately 4,000 poll workers to man our 490 precincts on Election Day, and of the 4,000, we lost about 500, so we had deficits in certain precincts. So we wanted to guarantee that that doesn't occur for the November election, so we had to trump up our recruiting process for the city of Detroit. And what we did at the top of the year, we worked with the Detroit Public Schools. Detroit Public Schools has 22 high schools, and we called in all of the student council representatives for each school and brought them in and talked to them about Democracy for Tomorrow. Democracy for Tomorrow is a group of individuals, high school students, who are concerned about the future of elections and who want to participate in that particular process to guarantee that every voter has an opportunity to engage in the process. With that group of individuals, there were about 50 students who came in, and we talked about elections, and we talked about perhaps having a mock election in the Detroit Public Schools. We met with the administration of Detroit Public Schools, and they agreed, and what they decided to do is to have the candidates for President of the United States on the ballot, as well as 2 advisory questions that they would submit to the students for them to vote on, so that they would have a part in 21st century education in the city of Detroit. So we had the election, the mock election, about a week and a half ago in Detroit Public Schools. Detroit Public Schools has approximately 32,000 students in their high schools, and of that 32,000, approximately 20,000 participated in the election. The beauty of that was the fact that we thought that we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First and foremost, introduce voters, students to the voting process, and then the other part was we can register students to vote and recruit. We were able to register approximately 1,200 students to vote for the upcoming election cycles, but the beautiful thing that occurred for us was the fact that in one day we were able to recruit more than 700 poll workers with that Democracy for Tomorrow program. Those students have been recruited, and we sent notices to them via the mail as well as email thanking them for participating in that Democracy for Tomorrow program. The next process is to make sure that each one of those students have an opportunity to go through our training program. We start training poll workers approximately 60 days prior to the election, And each one of those students will have an opportunity to go through the training process to ensure that they have a fundamental understanding of what they need to do at the precinct on Election Day. In terms of our training, because of the various changes and things that will impact us on Election Day, we've revamped our entire program. Just yesterday, we had a production company come out and observe the voting process, whereby they'll be able to create a training video for us for our poll worker training. And the training video will consist of opening the polls on Election Day, processing voters on Election Day, and closing. Those are the three main thrusts for Election Day. And then the fourth element is dealing with problems on Election Day. Problems that impact voters or impact the poll workers. First thing in the morning when they open the polls, if the machine isn't working, what do? Problems such as dealing with provisional voters, and problems such as what happens if the print totals process doesn't function properly. And each one of those particular training packs will be placed on our website, whereby the poll worker will have the opportunity to access that as a refresher. And on Election Day, if they have a problem, we require for our polling site assessors to have smartphones where they can go onto our website and pull up that particular problem and whittle their way through that process to have a fundamental understanding to guarantee exactness in terms of election results on Election Day. So we're excited about where the Detroit Department of Elections is. We're looking forward to the August primary, because we'll have the opportunity to kind of use that as a benchmark to make sure that every element of our process is functioning the way that it is, to guarantee that on Election Day on November 8th, each voter will have an opportunity to engage in the democracy process without any type of barriers. So I thank you for this opportunity, and it is definitely a pleasure.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. In percentage terms, I can add precisely 0.00 repeating to what my fellow panelists have said about the importance of good poll workers, whether it's young people, tech-savvy people, people with disabilities, in some communities, people who have alternate or multiple language abilities, customer service, or even our favorite people, just the ones who will show up when they're supposed to on Election Day. What I wanted to talk today about is something that we've been working on at the Election Academy at Minnesota in a partnership with the Fair Elections Legal Network and a group called Development Seed, with a grant from the Knight Prototype Fund. When we hear about state and local election officials across the country attempting to recruit poll workers, they're still using what I would call the old poll model, where you basically advertise for poll workers and hope that somebody will respond to your ad. What we found in my work at Pew and elsewhere is that with the technology we have with laptops, with mobile technology, people are more and more looking for ways to connect where I am, where I live, where I work, with opportunities to learn more about the election process. So whether it's registering to vote or checking your registration, whether it's through something like the Voting Information Project, finding out where do I vote, what's on my ballot, and what have you. There are opportunities out there to create portals that then you can share over social media, word of mouth, just about any community network, to give people an opportunity to connect where I am to where I need to be. And so
Doug,
with that,
I'm sorry, can you give that website?
I
so we
will.
can-
It is, and it's called workelections.com. Workelections.com is built on basically the same model as the Voting Information Project. It's currently active on a prototype basis in 7 states: Arizona, California, Florida, Nevada, New Mexico, Ohio, and Virginia. But the concept is really simple. You can put in an address, you can put in a zip code. If you're one of those people who actually knows what county you live in, you can put in your county name. And what it will do is it will take you to a page that tells you what the requirements are, what the pay is, and if that community has a recruitment page, it will give you a button that takes you to that page. If you live in a community that does not have its own recruitment page, the site has its own survey, which allows you to fill out what language ability, technical ability, what have you, and then we'll forward it to the responsible local election official. The idea is to shorten the distance between someone who is both capable but also willing to be a poll worker and the people in the election offices who need them. And so we're letting people know about this. We're going to be rolling it out over the next several months. So I wanted to let the commission know, wanted to let my fellow panelists know, wanted to let any of you out there in webcast land know that if you're interested in giving us your information, and we will certainly be strip mining the commission's materials on election worker requirements for this project as well. But drop us an email at info@fairelectionsnetwork.org. And we will make sure to get you added to workelections.com. But the goal is that instead of advertising for election officials, one of my colleagues talks about being in the state of Michigan and hearing the local election official essentially begging for poll workers on NPR. And he said, I don't know how many people who would actually be poll workers are listening to NPR. This is a way to use Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all those other things that my kids won't show me how to use, to reach out to people who may have alternate language abilities, to people with disabilities, to businesses and the like, to shorten that distance and hopefully give people like Ben and others a pool of people who will actually show up on Election Day, and like the other panelists, people who will actually know what they're doing. So again, I hope you'll all go take a look at workelections.com. Email us if you'd like to participate, and if you have any questions, and I know we'll get into this in the Q&A portion, you can also reach me at my university address at dchapin@umn.edu. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think that that's the first time you haven't used all your time.
Brevity is the very soul of wit, and it is my goal to be witty today.
Well, I want to open it up to my fellow commissioners for questions, but I also want to make sure that I let everyone know that we're going to include your entire bios in the materials. I briefly summarized it, and any materials that you might submit, we're also going to compile all that. So with that, I want to open up the questions to Vice Chair Masterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for being here and your testimony. It was excellent, and I actually have more questions than you can imagine, but I've promised my fellow commissioners not to take the rest of the day asking you all questions because there's a panel. The first question is for Mr. Buckland, and that is, I was wondering, I know your testimony, your formal testimony has some information on the Paraquad research that was done and information, but if you have it available, can you share a little bit about what the findings were about the challenges that voters with disabilities continue to face and some of that research?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Masterson. That was a part I didn't get to talk about much, and so I appreciate the opportunity to go into it more. It basically was in 3 phases, and what it was trying to do was identify what kind of training really works best with people with disabilities. And what we found was that a variety of different kinds of training work with different people with different kinds of disabilities. But the researchers developed new curriculums for poll workers out there. So the gist of it really was that the current way that training is provided may not be the best way to train poll workers, especially poll workers with disabilities. It provides some alternatives, and one of them was the job aid that I spoke briefly about, and that's actually providing someone who can walk people through the process and train them at that time. So it was essentially from the door through the whole process of voting, walking somebody through that and training them on how to do it, and not just giving them a manual and expecting them to learn from that, but actually providing a number, like I think somebody mentioned on the webisode, like some people learn visually and some people learn in other methods. So this was kind of looking at that and what works best for people with disabilities. So I hope that was helpful.
That's very helpful, and that's publicly available that we could take it and include it in our resources. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And some of it's in my written testimony.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. I'm not going to lie, Mr. Uminski, when you started talking algorithms, I got very excited. But we can have a side conversation about that. But I will say, I think your colleagues up testifying with you appeared intrigued as well by what you're doing in the data analysis. So the first question I have is this something that's publicly available? Is this something that LA County would share with other, particularly large counties, I think, in doing that?
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest challenges for our organization, despite our size, it's true we have probably larger budgets than many election administrations do, but despite all that, we're still limited in what we can and can't do. So for me, as heading up this program, it was a challenge to find something that was cost effective. So could we have gone to a vendor that had a fancy program to do these things? Sure. Could we have purchased fancy software to do these things, spend a lot of money on licenses? Yes, of course we can do those things. But instead, we've been able to find free software, and we use it's called R, statistical computation software. It's open source, anyone can use it. I learned how to use it and do these things in about 6 months. So any election administration who is interested in mining their data, because I assure you, most everyone has the same data that we have, maybe a little bit less of it, depending on your voter size, but still it's very relevant data. A lot of the data that we use came directly from the Census Bureau, things that helped inform us about, based on where our voters lived and where our poll workers live, we can know things such as median income, and all sorts of other demographic information that we don't collect, but would be useful to an algorithm, right? But it's all free, and it's just a matter of spending the time and allowing staff to learn these things and dig into the data to derive interesting and important business insights.
How does the algorithm account for new residents of LA County? So as you look at your confidence rate, obviously LA County has quite a bit of turnover, both new and leaving. How do you account for that in your confidence ratio to reach out to those folks new to LA County?
Absolutely. So it is true that this algorithm uses a myriad of data points that help inform it as to what would be a high score versus a low score. But in a sense, based on the data that exists to us, it is biased towards folks that have high levels of civic participation, such as voting records. So if you have a lengthy voting participation rate, you're probably going to get a higher score. If you've worked with us for a lengthy period of time and have a proven track record, you're going to probably have a higher score. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other data points for younger voters, for other folks that haven't spent as much time in LA County that won't provide them with additional scores. There's a lot of other data points, a lot of demographic data points that allow for a myriad of different types of poll workers to be included in the high scores. The really interesting thing, too, for us is we ran our entire 4.8 million group of voters through this algorithm because in our minds, we were like, well, this is a whole untapped pool of folks that we've never called before. Sure, 100,000 is a lot, but we go through those lists very quickly. So is there a way we can bring in fresh folks that have never worked for us, never been in contact before? And as it turns out, the algorithm has found 87,000 additional folks from our voter file that we've never called before and that would potentially be folks that would say yes and be committed on election day to working as a poll worker.
Well, I can assure you, and I think I speak for the other two commissioners, I think we'll be following up with you on how to share this with other election officials.
Absolutely.
And the work you're doing. I mean, it's amazing work and the approach you're doing.
Thank you.
So kudos to you. Hi, Sherry. I'll take a point of personal privilege. Sherry is the election official in my home county of Hamilton County, Cincinnati, Ohio, which I fondly miss. And so thank you for the work you do. Thank you for serving my mother. I assure you she's a high needs voter for you all. And this question goes to any of the panelists, honestly, but I'll start with you, Sherry, and that is, as you were identifying and rolling out this new technology, and as any election official does, assessing your risks, were you looking at the age of your poll workers? I'm sure you addressed training, but was this something you had identified before? And now that you're bringing in younger poll workers, are they naturally gravitating to, hey, you know what? I'll set up the poll book. I got this.
There we go. We did look at that prior to implementing. We had focus groups of poll workers that came in actually before we implemented so we could get their feedback. And there really wasn't any red flags that came up at that time that would tell us, we're not ready for this yet, that they're not ready for this yet. I think that in hindsight, perhaps that during the training, there were poll workers who maybe didn't want to admit that they weren't grasping the new technology. Our mistake was that we tried to make it be so easy for the poll workers. We didn't want this technology to scare them. And I think by just saying over and over again, this is really easy, there'll be no problems, then the poll workers were a little intimidated to actually raise their hand and say, I'm not grasping this. So that's why we've tweaked our training and that sort of thing. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Did the younger poll workers naturally gravitate towards setting up the newer technology?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually have a personal story. I have a 17-year-old high school senior, and of course, I recruited her to work the polls in the past March presidential primary. And she attended the training class and came home and said, Mom, I don't understand what you've been stressing out about the past few months. These e-poll books are really easy. And I said, well, now imagine teaching Grandma and Grandpa how to use the e-poll books. And she said, oh, okay. But she very much enjoyed her experience on Election Day. And then, like I said, the media in Cincinnati loved the story. They did lots of interviews with the kids that work the polls, and I think it made them feel really proud and special. So it's definitely an avenue we're going to continue to reach out to.
Awesome. And I think it's an awesome example, too, of taking a challenging situation for you all, and you've turned it into a positive, both bringing new people into the process, but also the media seeing how you're proactively addressing some of the concerns, which I think's really awesome. For anyone on the panel, I promise it's my final one for now. As you focus on recruiting poll workers, and we talked a little about recruiting voters with disabilities to be poll workers, language minorities, and your focus on language minorities. I know you mentioned as part of the algorithm. Just a little bit about how you target language assistance in poll worker training. Do you work with your language assistance office, which I know is very active? How do you all address some of that in the recruitment process? And then, Doug, how does your tool, I think you said it allows people to self-identify, but if you could address that a little bit as well.
In the city of Detroit, our biggest minority population, of course, is African American. However, Hispanics and Arabic represent a large portion of our population. And what we do is we work with the council member that represents those particular communities, and we also set up satellites in those communities to ensure that we have outreach to recruit individuals who speak Arabic as well as Spanish. With our 30 days prior to every election, we send out an Election Connection newsletter, and that Election Connection newsletter is in English, Arabic, and in Spanish. And we recruit poll workers for that particular reason, or through that particular medium, so that we can make sure that we have representation at each one of those particular communities. In Detroit, the Southwest community is largely representative of Hispanics, so we make sure that in each one of those precincts, we have at least one person who can assist in interpreting the ballot or any type of instructions that they need. In addition to the northeast side of the city is represented by Arabics, and we make sure that we have representation in each one of those particular communities. Each one of those individuals who are recruited by us, they're trained to deal with those particular sensitivities, and we make sure that each one is assigned a T-shirt that says Spanish interpreter or Arabic interpreter, and it's in their particular language.
Yeah, in terms of what the site does, if a jurisdiction like, say, Detroit, says that it needs Spanish-speaking and/or Arabic-speaking poll workers, the site will say that. And if the community has its own poll worker page, I'm guessing there will be an opportunity for individuals to self-identify. For folks who don't have their own recruitment page, our survey includes questions about whether or not you speak, you feel comfortable communicating in another language. And you may even get some communities that don't know that they need someone who speaks Hmong, but might want to have a person like that in the polling place. One other thing, since we're taking points of personal privilege, I do think one of my long-term goals with this project is to help make the profession of election administration look more like the populace generally. And as we've seen, I think most of my fellow panelists will probably attest that poll work is often a gateway drug into election administration. And so to the extent that we can pull people from communities, whether they are voters with disabilities or people who come from communities with other language experience, to the extent that we can bring poll workers in who then maybe catch the bug and become election officials, makes the profession look like the populace, which can only be a good thing in the long term. So anything we can do to facilitate that process, we're happy to do.
Commissioner Masterson, if I might, please remember folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, and they are going to need interpreters, whether poll workers or whether people coming to the polls to vote. So, and there's some guidance in the Fairfax election guide that I had talked about earlier about how to communicate with people who are deaf. So it's brief, but I think that's an area that we probably need to do some more work on.
Just briefly to add, it's for LA County, we have so many different communities and language needs. And while Spanish is probably the most ubiquitous as a foreign language, I know we do staff different, and it's at the precinct level because we can know that. You know, voters are able to tell us what their needs are. In addition to, we can rely upon data that we glean from Census Bureau in terms of foreign languages by census tract and what projections we need to make in terms of services that we should be providing at the precinct level. And we rely upon all of that and funnel that information to our poll worker recruitment program so that they know, okay, for this particular board, we need to have this number of poll workers, and we need to at least have this number of folks that can speak Spanish, that can speak Russian, that can speak Chinese, or whatever the case is. And so we do rely upon those data points to help us know what we need to be providing. And something that we have learned, and I think it's very common in terms of recruitment for most anyone, is you're trying to minimize distance traveled from poll worker home to poll worker site. So you're already going to be recruiting from those communities, and so it makes things a little bit easier when you know, okay, half our folks need to be speaking Spanish. Well, we're going to be recruiting from those communities directly, right? And so we can rely upon, hopefully, in addition to this algorithm we've created, to be able to identify those folks that speak those languages and we can count on to show up on election day.
Wow, I'm just like 3-shot espresso excited about some of the ideas that I've heard here today. I mean, this is great stuff, and I appreciate you all coming here and sharing what you're doing with us and with those who are watching on the webcast. And hopefully some of these ideas will filter out to the election administrators across the country. I have a few questions. I'll start with Mr. Chapin. Great project that you're working on. Excited about that. Is there any cost for jurisdictions using this election worker app? And what kind of response have you seen in the states so far where this has been rolled out?
To answer your first question, there's really no cost other than the effort to make the information available. The goal is to make it easier for folks to share their needs and their information with people who are looking for it. So we certainly don't charge for it. It really is intended to be a service that expands your reach. It's early yet on uptick in terms of how many people are using it. We've really just put it together and are rolling it out now. The places that we worked with to set up the prototype states are very excited about it. And we're hoping especially once the primary season is over and people start to think about the fall, to start pushing this out through social media, all of those channels I know about and those I don't, to allow election offices to make connections to the people they're going to need in November.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Baxter, we've sometimes heard that education officials are not, they're reluctant or they're opposed, with sometimes legitimate reasons, working with election officials. Did you experience any of that when you were rolling out your program in the schools there? And if not, what is it that you think encouraged the election or the education officials to work with you to get this going? Because we'd love to see more cooperation between education officials and election officials across the country.
Well, I don't know how much you know about the city of Detroit, but the Detroit Public Schools at this particular time are going through a number of challenges, and it was probably fortuitous for them to partner with us in order to cultivate a feel-good story about the Detroit Public Schools. And they felt that it would be a great opportunity for the students to have a chance to answer some questions as it pertains to how DPS is administered. For instance, one of the questions that they posed to the students was, do they think that it would be a good idea to post the building surveys after each inspection occurs for each building, because there's some challenges there. And then the other question was, do you think that a student should be present at all of the Board of Education meetings to offer viable input? So those questions were kind of intriguing. Even the media picked up on that to kind of, articulate what DPS was doing. And that opportunity kind of was in lockstep with where we were going, and the schools were very happy to work with the Department of Elections. And one caveat that was beneficial for us was that our current city clerk used to be a former school teacher for Detroit Public Schools, so that carried a little weight for us as well. But no, we had no challenges. It was a great experience.
So, but what I think I'm hearing you say is that they found some benefit in working.
Absolutely.
I think what we're seeing is that the education officials aren't finding benefit to working with election officials. And
Correct.
I think the more we encourage the benefit to the education folks, that maybe we'll see some more cooperation like you have.
Absolutely.
So that's great.
Thank you.
Ms. Poland, thank you for being here. You mentioned the average age of the poll workers is 70. Was that before or after you put in your youth at the booth efforts?
That was before.
And how has that changed since you, or have you done that metric at all?
I have not done that metric yet. But I think that we did lose some poll workers after implementing the e-poll books, but those that were maybe on the bubble and came back in March when they had their younger counterpart that took over running the e-poll books, and then they could sit back and handle more of the procedural questions, that type of thing, actually really helped tremendously in keeping the older generation poll workers.
So have you heard some feedback from them? And
Yes.
What kinds of feedbacks have you heard from them?
Very positive feedback regarding the Youth at the Booth program, with having the high schoolers work with them. Also, something else that we did is we increased the number of troubleshooters or rovers that are out in the field, and we made them much more accessible to the poll workers. So we received a lot more positive feedback regarding that. In fact, we even had a poll worker that called and wanted the home address of their troubleshooter because she wanted to send them a thank you card for all their help. Yes, I think, and again, looking at the younger generation to get involved, we tapped into our local colleges to recruit those troubleshooters. Sometimes they have to deal with a little more difficult situations, sometimes conflicts between voters and poll workers or campaigners, and so we didn't want to put that burden on the high schoolers, so we went to the colleges to recruit the troubleshooters, and again had very positive feedback from our older poll workers.
That's awesome. Thank you. Mr. Buckland, you mentioned your organization and other organizations that election officials can call with regard to recruiting persons with disabilities to be poll workers. Are there any other special or additional considerations that election administrators would need to employ in the recruitment of poll workers who might have disabilities?
Yeah, I think if you're going to recruit people with disabilities, you do need to make sure that, first of all, your facilities are accessible, and secondly,
Great
some of the
point.
communication things that we just talked about in regards to people who are deaf. And so, yeah, you need to be ready to accept people with disabilities. And then the first part of my testimony kind of focused on how you can do job customization for people with disabilities. In other words, like some of the skills that are needed to do one job, they may not be able to provide or do those tasks, but they could take something else somebody else is doing, and that person could then perform the functions that they're supposed to, if you will. So you customize the job to fit the person's abilities. And so that's another thing that you need to be mindful about, is there are ways to do that, and there's materials out there about how to do that. So there's some assistance to help put that together too.
So it sounds like it takes some planning, but it is achievable, and maybe some checklists would be helpful as well. And
Yeah, and the resources that we provided are really good resources to help you do that too. They can help
Right.
you make sure that you're accessible, you're ready to receive people as poll workers, and that you understand how to do that job customization, that kind of stuff. So.
Thank you. And Mr. Uminski, what kinds of data is in this recruitment algorithm? I find this fascinating. And then of that data, are there one or two pieces that are, more useful than others, or is it just kind of equal across the board?
Absolutely. So when I was developing this algorithm, one thing that occurred to me was what would really drive a poll worker to be a poll worker, right? And in talking to our poll worker recruiters, there's a lot of different things that, when they call people, they rely upon. Is this person, are we calling a poor neighborhood? Is this person regularly engaged with us, so on and so forth? So I tried to model a lot of those intuitions, right? So some of the data points are exactly reflective of those types of human intuition, such as civic engagement, right? So I really felt that civic engagement would be a great predictor for whether or not you're going to be civically engaged and work at the polls, right? But what proxy value or what metric can we use to represent civic engagement, right? So it got me thinking, like, well, what about donations made to charities? Is that reflective? What about whether people, attend social gatherings or churches? Is that reflective? Well, that all might be reflective, but I don't have access to any of that data, right? But one thing that got me thinking was, well, we do have direct access to probably the most relevant, and that's voter rates. So are you actually a voter? Are you showing up and regularly casting a ballot? Because that, I think, really reflects that level of engagement that we're looking for, right? And so as it turns out, that is one of the core predictors for the algorithm, is civic engagement through voting, right? And it's not just voting, right? We can develop rates of, okay, for the last X number of elections, you showed up this many times, right? So we can get that rate. But we also found that there are different levels of engagement, different clusters that we might say, like, okay, well, these voters, they are consistent 100% voters, right? But they only showed up for the last 2, right? So maybe that doesn't reflect good engagement. So we had to do some additional mathematical derivation in the model to really tease out, okay, which folks can we really use this metric for, and which folks the metric doesn't really apply that much. In addition, median income is another one, and we were able to pull that data directly from the Census Bureau. While I would have loved to have mined the Franchise Tax Board's data for our individual voters, that would have been illegal, and I wouldn't have been able to get access to that data. But we do have a really good proxy in terms of median income at the group block level for the Census Bureau, and that data is publicly available and it's free. It's just a matter of matching up where our folks live, which we know, finding out what their specific group block assignment is, and then matching that up with the Census Bureau, and we're able to pull that in. In addition, it's not just a matter of median income, but a gender split on median income, because that matters greatly, that we realize as well. And we happen to collect gender data on all of our voters. Likewise, age data is an important predictor. There's lots of additional data points and other data points I would love to pull in that we don't yet have access to further refine and make the model be more accurate than it is.
It's a great use of data mining, really. I mean,
Thank you.
we have been trying to promote the use of data, and this is just a great example of how useful data can be in elections.
Thank you. And it's been a very fun and interesting project for me as a data scientist.
So one further question, have you been able to reduce your staff manpower necessary for recruiting by using this algorithm?
So I think like anything, when you move an agency into a new culture of data-driven decision-making, it's going to take steps, right? So where I would love to say, hey, everyone's just using the list generated by this algorithm, that wouldn't be a fair assessment of where our managers are and where our recruiters are. It's a slow process in which they now have a new tool that they can engage. We will monitor the success of that tool from election to election. And as more and more recruiters and managers see that the tool is really accurate, they'll push this more onto the recruiters and say, okay, guys, your human intuitions are great, and we want you to continue using human intuitions, but you know what? We're going to use these lists as our core lists, right? So I can't represent that we are there yet, but they now have a new tool that they are using and they're engaging, and we're able to monitor very accurately and very precisely how good this tool is.
How many elections have you used this for?
So this is the first election that we've been able to operationalize.
This primary coming up on June
Absolutely.
7th. Okay,
So it'll be a
great.
great election to test it out on and see how well it performs.
Great. Thank you all very much for being here. Commissioner Hicks, thank you.
Thank you. Most of my questions have been answered, but I do have a few other ones as well. Mr. Buckland, I want to thank your wife for serving as a poll worker in Fairfax County. I had the privilege of serving as a poll worker for several elections before I started working in the House of Representatives, and then wasn't able to continue on with that. But I wanted to say, please thank your wife for serving as that, and wanted to ask what sort of things can also be done for the recruitment of people with disabilities, other than just making sure that they have access to the polls themselves. How can we expand that out a little bit more?
Well, that's a great question. I think the study that was done at Paraquad gives some of that, and you can look through that. But I think really kind of one of the best ways, I think, is really kind of demystifying this whole process for people. I think a lot of them don't feel like they could be capable. I think at the first of my testimony, I talked about the woman who's blind and that she was reluctant at the beginning, I think because she was concerned about how her skills as a blind woman would be used, and I think that's what most people with disabilities are concerned about is, are they going to look at my disability and not my abilities and not know that I can contribute? And so I think, one, demystifying the process and letting them know that it's accessible and you actually would love to have their skills at the polling places really is a really good tool to recruit people.
Right.
Make them feel welcome and make them feel wanted. I think that's the...
Right. I think that human aspect means a lot to a lot of different people. Mr. Uminsky, this is just really exciting to me. I'm actually coming out to California for the primary, so I'm interested to hear more about how this is actually going to be implemented. I guess my question goes back to a little bit towards the new laws that are going to be taking effect in terms of the automatic voter registration, because you mentioned that mostly with people being recruited as poll workers, it comes on with them being actually registered to vote, or being basically a high school senior maybe as well. But I wanted to know how you are intending, if you are, to use the automatic voter registration piece to go towards recruiting new poll workers as well.
Absolutely. So as it turns out, while registered voters is probably our greatest pool of candidates that we pick from, there are other folks. So, other county agencies provide volunteers, and they don't necessarily live in LA County. We have Orange County that directly neighbors us, so there's that commuting. And we're able to recruit folks from that pool as well. So you don't have to be a registered voter, just as, we recruit high school students. I think Sherry talked a little bit about a high school recruitment program that they're doing. We do something very similar, and we're trying to bring in, younger voters to be part of this process. But to answer your question, I think for us, with Motor Voter, as we see a massive influx of newly registered voters that are done automatically for us, what that basically means is that's just more folks I could run through the algorithm and identify as to whether or not, based on whatever data points exist, because I've seen the algorithm be able to predict on someone that has had zero voting experience and very little work experience, but there are additional data points that make them a high probability candidate as well. So those folks won't be missed simply because they're new to the system. The likelihood may be much lower than someone that is a steady voter and steady worker for the algorithm, but that doesn't mean that we'll be able to gloss over. And in addition, as I really want to stress, while these algorithms are wonderful, they're only one tool, right, for our recruiters. So our recruiters will still be expected to reach out to different communities, regardless of what the algorithm says, still be able to reach out and maintain those relationships to find new folks that the algorithm is not going to find. Because remember, the algorithm is based on the data that we have, and some of the data is a little dirty or noisy and may confuse the algorithm. And likewise, there may be data points that we've never imagined that the algorithm can't predict on, that a human being picking up the phone and making contact with another human being would be able to yield really good results as well. So we just need to combine multiple approaches to be able to pull in a lot of those new folks that are going to be pulled in from Motor Voter.
Great, thank you. This, I guess, question goes to Ms. Poland and Mr. Baxter, and if you can each individually answer it, I'd really much appreciate it. But I guess it goes towards recruitment of younger poll workers, and you both individually talked about that. And I guess it's more of my interest in knowing more about how we can do this in a way that doesn't alienate older poll workers, because I guess that the other piece of the question that I wanted to have answered was, do you gear your training towards the age of the individual, in terms of younger folks are going to maybe more interested in learning through technology, or older folks might want paper to be used towards their technology and towards their recruitment and learning of how to become a poll worker in the training itself. So do you gear your training towards the overall different demographics of the poll worker themselves? Because I guess I'm going towards the when we build buildings, you might build a school a lot differently than you would build a nursing home, in terms of the people who are actually using that facility.
Right. Right now, our training is geared, everyone receives the same training. And we did that because in the November 2015 election, the first time we implemented on a countywide, we did sort of tweak the training, and certain individuals attended one type of class and certain individuals attended a different type of class. But we realized is that you can't pigeonhole people into those particular categories. And again, after the election, the feedback that we got, after the November election, the feedback we got from a lot of the poll workers was that, I was sent to this class, but if I would have been instructed on how to do this certain process, I could have helped a lot on election day, but because I wasn't trained on that, I didn't know. So what we did in the March election was everyone received the same training. And that seemed to work a lot better for us. But then we have voting location managers, and it's their job to actually assign the jobs on election day. And so when we train the location managers, we teach them to look for that. Identify those workers in your location that would be better suited to run the e-poll book, or that would be better suited to, pass out the I voted today stickers, or to assist someone at the voting booth, that sort of thing.
Great, great.
We just had this argument at my office last week in terms of new technology versus paper, and how the different demographics, age demographics, learns and understand. The visuals are geared toward more younger folk, whereas we also supplement that with handouts. In fact, we're putting together a poll worker manual for all of our poll workers, so that they can take that home for review. So they'll have the manual as well as the video to couple with that to ensure that each one of those individuals or those learning models will be incorporated in terms of our particular training. For the most part, with our young folk, yeah, we try to push them toward the technology, but we have learned through the years that, you know, just because you're not 18 through 35, it doesn't preclude you from using technology. We have some more seasoned poll workers who are more efficient on our M100 tabulators, AutoMarks, as well as our electronic poll books than some of our younger folk who are 18, 19, and 20. So we try to incorporate and blend all of the learning models in our training to ensure that each one of our poll workers receives that particular model that best suits them.
Great, thank you. And I guess most of that, my question was geared towards the fact that when we release our new election worker manual today, it's really heavily weighted onto links themselves as opposed to the way that it's usually been done of just focusing on just the printed word. It's mostly you click on that link and you get more information that way. And so that's what I was trying to emphasize a little bit more with that question itself. I wanted to follow up a little bit on your recruitment of poll workers. You said that you do it mostly through government agencies or corporations, but I wanted to know, do you also look at advocacy groups as well?
Yes, and that's something that we've done for many years, is contacting all the local church organizations, different civic organizations. The reaching out to the government agencies and the local businesses is something new because we're asking them to give their employees a day off with pay. But yes, traditionally, we still recruit from those other avenues as well.
Great, thank you. Doug, I'm not forgetting about you. So thank you again for agreeing to testify last minute for us. But I wanted you to expand a little bit more out on your work with the website itself, because I've seen it in action, and I think it's great, and wanted to know what sort of steps are you going to take to expand it out to not just those 7, but hopefully include all 50 states and territories as well.
Basically, what we're trying to do, first of all, is we're trying to get as many folks within the sound of my voice or at the webcast today to reach out to us. We will, as I mentioned, strip mine the materials that you all have made available to pull as many of those as possible. I will definitely be reaching out to state associations, to election officials across the country. We really are, this is intended to be a way to expand their reach. We're hopefully not trying to create more work for them. I think long term, I'd love to find a way to partner with initiatives like the Voting Information Project and other data systems to make this kind of information available as a matter of course. But really the goal is to get as close to 100% coverage as possible by November, and hopefully result in these folks and their colleagues across the country having more people than they know what to do with on Election Day.
Okay, great, thank you. Unless there's a brief question, I wanted to excuse the panel.